There you go. But if you
Skill
have
issue.
you're gonna get a lot of echo, guys. Okay.
Give us 1 second. Plugging everything in.
Yeah. Great. Cool. All right. More people are arriving anyways, too, so that's fantastic. I didn't actually start the event. Now people seem to be they like the event notification. Great. There we are.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. All right. I think this is working. Zoom fast.
There we go.
It is amazing.
Yeah, so it's great to see everyone. I'm gonna share my screen really quick. One moment. Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Oh, that's actually trash. 1 sec.
I think this is maybe.
What are you trying to do? There we go.
Okay.
Now you have to
And
go
then,
share
yeah,
Discord.
right here. All right, so sorry about this, y'all. We will get this going. Share screen.
Just go to screen. Alright, I lied. Or just go application.
Yeah, because I don't see it. I'll just share my screen.
There we
All
go.
right, can you confirm that you see this on over here?
There we go.
All right.
You can see it.
And now my audio's not
We can hear him.
going through. Man.
We can hear him. We're fine.
Blue.
We can hear you and we can see the screen.
There we go.
There we go.
Now we're good. Now we're good.
All right.
Holy moly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert. My online handle is Caro. This is Josh. His online handle is Josh. We're going to be talking a little bit about Subnet 4 today. I'm going to give a good little bounce pass to Josh. And we're going to get into it. All right. So for those who don't know us, all right, I'll let you do it.
We're Manifold Labs. We run Subnet 4 here on bittensor. Manifold was founded by Rob here, one of the old people at OpenSensor. We not only run Subnet 4, we also run a validator on a couple subnets. And then right now, Subnet 4, something we're really proud of recently is we're up to about 14 billion tokens a month, and we're hoping to be able to scale that to a couple 100 billion, if not a minimum of 100 billion by end of 2024.
Yeah, we're going to get to 1 trillion tokens. This is our goal. Okay, 1 trillion or bust. So one of the first things we built with Subnet 4, one of the things we want to do is really showcase that you can take some sort of commodity that you create on bittensor and really turn that into an actual product that people could use. And so our first iteration of that was Sybil.com. So Sybil goes out, uses CRXNG, which is like a decentralized search engine, or it's a meta search engine. So it queries a bunch of other search engines, gets the results back, and then we feed those results to a large language model, which is bittensor, the Subnet 4 miners. And then that gives you a little summary of whatever you searched for online, kind of like a knockoff of Perplexity. Except it's free for us. It's super cheap to use, for us and for us to run. It's now fully open source. Any validator or anyone that's interested can go take a look at exactly how it works. The front end's open source, back end's open source, whole 9 yards. Right now, it uses React on the front end, and then one of the things we were very proud of is using Go as the back end that interfaces with the miners. Specifically today, in the last week, we've done a lot of work on Targon Hub, which is currently the core that powers Sybil, and being able to do these fine-tuned controls on stuff like timeouts, and being able to know, okay, how long should a TLS handshake take before a miner responds, and how can we make sure that as much time as possible
is not wasted, and we really know like if we query a miner, are they responding correctly, and then can we make sure that we save those queries, or like what miners fail a request, so that later on we can score those organic queries and really start punishing miners for not taking organic requests, and giving miners big boosts for taking organic requests. And so now that all that infra's in, it's all open source. So yeah, go take a look. It's some really cool stuff. So one of the things that powered this, that was another thing that we're very proud of, is the Epistula protocol that we made here. I think our video is bugging out a little bit, but
it's good.
Okay. So Epistula, it's different than the original Axon interface that most people are used to. The reason we wanted something different was some of the new bittensor versions were erroring, or just like we would try and update versions and the Axon would break even though we hadn't necessarily changed anything, and it was just becoming very frustrating. And so we went to the drawing board and said, okay, what's something we can make that not only serves our needs right now, but will serve everybody's needs and will really be something that can last for a long time. And the biggest thing, one of the biggest things we wanted was something that was very opinionless. So it's much more opt-in than it is opt-out. And what I mean by that is there's no part of the request that you really have to look at or that you really have to verify in order to use a request. So miners can trade in as much security as they want for speed, and same for validators, or really any entity that's using this whole protocol. And that's another thing that we wanted to do with Epistula, is specifically not make it a package. We wanted it to be more of just a protocol, a definition of standards, and let people kind of implement that however they want. And so that's what we use in our Go API right now, our validators. I think on the next slide, you can see this is essentially all the code minus the create header hook that we need to interface with our miners. Our miners themselves are OpenAI compliant, and this is all because of Epistula. As you can see, you just create your OpenAI object in Python, and then on the HTTP client, the only thing that's needed to really make it work with Epistula is that last function that just takes in your validator hotkey, your Axon info, or like the hotkey of the miner, and then the model you're running. And with those three things, that hook will run right before any OpenAI request is sent and add in all of those headers to the request. And that's all the miners need.
And so this interfaces directly with a miner. So this query hits a miner?
Yeah, on the top there, you'll see axon info equals metagraph.axons, and then you put in the miner number. That is direct. That's in our subnet code. We use the OpenAI package to query our miners.
And what is OpenAI, this client, doing underneath the hood that's different than the Axon?
That's it's an interesting question. So it's not necessarily doing anything that the Axon was doing. The big difference here is what is Epistula doing that the Axon interface didn't do. So here, the Epistula protocol doesn't care what the body looks like at all, because the hashing and the signature is done on the byte level of the request body. So right before the request is sent, whether it's a JSON object, whether that's an image being sent as a post request, if there's no body at all, it doesn't matter. It's whatever the bytes, if any, of the body exist, it'll sign those. And so we can use OpenAI specifically, or the OpenAI interface specifically, because Epistula doesn't care what the body looks like. And so we're not necessarily using OpenAI for like security or anything. It's more of just how much benefit it gave us from a developer experience perspective, where I now have all of the OpenAI like typing built in, errors. I have all these different things built in, and it makes it much easier to just build products off of our miners in general, knowing that they're OpenAI compliant.
Right. It's just a standard, and you guys are porting yourselves into it. Wait, so you're telling me that the Axon interface is not a well-known standard?
Well, and to be fair, like neither is Epistula. Like it's just our little thing. But the difference is ours is it's just a protocol, and anyone can go read exactly how it works under the hood, down to like the very lowest level of how the signature is being made. And that was my personal problem with the Axon interface, was it was all a big black box. And I'm one of those people where if I'm writing something, I really want to know how it works. And so that's what we made, something where people could really understand how it works and really take advantage of it as much or as little as they wanted.
So, little caveat here. Well, not caveat, bit of a side story. Josh, when you first joined Manifold, you wrote a scathing review of the Axon. It was like the first real hit piece that I ever really like cared about, ever written about bittensor. It wasn't really a hit piece. It was just really honest review of the Axon code, which, to be fair to us, we built very quickly as a plugin, and we always knew that it was going to be ripped out. So funnily enough, just the other day, the Datura team figured out that there's actually a 40x increase in speed that you can get by just removing the hashing of the headers in the Axon protocol in Pydantic. You just get a 40x increase in speed. So there's a lot of overhead in that protocol, and the reason we had it was because we thought that, hey, like maybe these things are not going to be so speed dependent and for everyone, but for your use case, it just makes so much sense, right? Like it's all about building a standard that anybody can use, anybody can plug in, like directly into Cursor, for instance, or any application front end, and then behind the scenes making it blazingly fast. So yeah.
Yeah, and that I trust me, I remember writing that. One of the first things I did when I joined Manifold was reverse engineer the Axon interface itself, and that was kind of my first deep dive into bittensor, was just like really figuring out how that worked under the hood. And I just remember being at a coffee shop till like 2 a.m. trying to figure out how on earth this hashing is done and what I need to do to write this in Go. And yeah, it took way too long, but anyways, that was a whole fun trip. So now we're at Targon Hub. So this is another thing we've built. This was actually built after Sybil and before Epistula, but now Sybil uses Targon Hub. We removed Sybil itself used to query miners directly, and now Sybil will proxy to Targon Hub, so that now all organic queries, whether they're from Sybil, whether they're from someone using Targon Hub as a OpenAI compliant endpoint, what have you, they all go to one central database. And so one of the things that we're building, hopefully we'll start, if not get it done next week, which I'll talk about this in a little bit too, is some sort of endpoint that sits next to our ingester, which we'll talk about. But essentially, it's something that validators can not only send validators could not only send synthetic requests, but any validator could grab organic requests in real time from this node that will run and connect to our database that has these organics. And then again, this is all optional. Like a validator could plug into this system if they wanted to, and if they didn't want to be a part of this organic system and use their own, they could absolutely do that too. And this will all be open source, of course. But we'll hopefully be able to start really scoring based on organic queries even more than synthetic queries, which is one of our biggest goals. And I think for a lot of these usage-based subnets, I feel like that's like the general goal, is to really move off of synthetic data and start really getting like a proof of concept from organic data. So Targon Hub has been amazing. One of the really cool things is using this Epistula protocol and writing it in Go, and really being able to just have so much more of a low-level understanding of what's going on and be able to use a lot of these primitives. One of the things I was working on today was really getting into the weeds on what types of different timeouts we use when interacting with miners. A lot of miners, how do you tell the difference between a miner that's just taking a little bit to respond versus a miner that's not there at all? And it's like, you could have a timeout for the TLS handshake or for time to first byte, or you could have a timeout that kind of extends itself every time you get a byte back. All these different things that are just much easier to do in Go than Python. And also just being a compiled language, getting the speed benefit from that. It's been a really fun time. And again, all open source for anybody that wants to go look at it or even run their own. And being in Go and being so lightweight, it's extremely cheap for us to run. We could run one of these Targon Hub backends on an a Linode instance for $5 a month easily. They're very, very, very light instances.
And so this API that you wrote, or this toolkit, It's wrapped in Python, correct?
No, nope. The Targon hub itself is purely in Go and nothing but Go.
And to what degree does it connect to the bittensor blockchain in Go? Are there like Go versions of the metagraph and things like this?
No, sorry. So, okay, you are right. There is a Python sidecar. It's its own Docker image, and the Python sidecar will query the metagraph every, I think I have it set to 30 minutes or so. And that will look at all, or it'll load in the hotkey and cold key. It'll look at all the miners currently on our subnet. And then that sidecar will query all the miners and basically ask like, hey, what models are you running? And then save that in a Redis database. And then that's how we know what miners to hit. So our Go API.
Oh, uh-oh. We lost, let me see if I can bring Rob back up on stage.
There we go. There we go. We got booted up.
Yeah, apologies about that.
I didn't do that. So
there we go.
bring your screen back up.
All right, I'm not sure where we dropped off.
You were dropping off, you were talking about the Redis database,
Yes.
the Python sidecar.
Yes. So you have this Python sidecar, very, very small. It's no more than 100 lines of code, I think. It just sits there, grabs all the miners, their IP addresses, ports, and then what models they're running, which it'll query itself. It'll query each miner with the validator hotkey, post all that to a Redis database, and then when we get a request in from or an organic query, the Go API will query the Redis database and say, hey, give me some miners that are running this model, and then go query one of those miners for that model. And then save it all to a database that we can then send out to validators later on.
Cool. Would love it if you wrote, and I'm sure you're a very busy man, Josh, but to write a version of the bittensor API in Go for people that wanted to build really highly performant validators and miners, that would be a huge, real gift to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that too. I wanted to do that a while ago. I think the biggest roadblock I have and would love some help on, probably from like the OTF team or something of the sorts, is how the storage like hashes are calculated. I believe I tried writing something in Go and I couldn't quite get the
SQL.
Yeah, the actual, like when you're calculating the storage hash.
That's a longer conversation. We won't go over it here on the call, but it's something called scale codec that you need to
Gotcha.
learn.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you guys are willing to work together on that, I'd love to get something going for that. That'd be sick. I would love to make a Go, or maybe not necessarily a Go, but some sort of compiled CLI. I know I've been screaming about that forever.
Yeah. Rust would be the best. But let's move on. Let's continue with this.
So that's a lot of the things we've built on top of Targon over the years on Subnet 4. And so I want to take these last few moments here to talk about Targon v4. We just released, I believe, this past Monday, with some really, really cool new features. We can now have on-demand per validator models. So any validator can choose what model they're querying miners on. And this doesn't have to just have to be one model. It can be any number of models, as long as they all can fit on the node that the validator is running. It'll work for that validator. The validators themselves almost act like super mini Kubernetes controllers. It's not literally using Kubernetes, but it's Kubernetes-esque in the way that the validator itself is managing the lifetime and life cycles of a bunch of different Docker images, including it takes care of calculating how much GPU space it has left, how much GPU space it needs for a new model, all this sort of stuff. And right now it's working really well, and we're really happy with it. And we still have a lot of plans. One of the things we want to do is enable GPU sharding, so we can start querying miners for 70 billion models. We have some more plans that'll make validating more efficient. We hope to be able to do what you can do on an 8-box on a single A100. Which would be awesome. It would bring costs down for all the validators while keeping the same amount of models that we're querying. So it'll be really fun. We also have some cool stuff in here where miners will report what models they claim they're running so that we can kind of optimistically query miners and not waste time querying miners that aren't running a given model. The coolest thing that this really opens up for us, like we've talked about, is model leasing, where now we can actually sell the ability to organic users to run the model on top of charging them for actually querying that model. So if there's some new model that came out and people know that they can run it on subnet 4 for much cheaper than they could query it anywhere else, they could pay Targon Hub or whatever other validator wanted to implement this whole stack. I'll say whatever amount of money, and then we just say, okay, cool, we'll host this model on Targon for you on one of our validators, and now miners will be incentivized to run that model. So that's really, really cool. We're super excited about that. And then one of the last things, go ahead.
So Josh, this is a big innovation for the subnet, I think. Is there any other place on bittensor where this is possible today? First off,
the model leasing, not to my knowledge. I don't
know anyone who's doing model
and
leasing.
like where else could you do this? So like if I go to Together AI or other inferencing services, maybe like I can do this on Hugging Face, right? Is there like a comparable on Hugging Face for the same thing?
Not
good.
I'm sorry to jump in here. I don't think that there's the only thing I'm familiar with that does something similar is like what's known as like GPU-less providing. So like RunPod, for example, will do, or it's like serverless GPUs. So it's like, well, you can run a model on RunPod, but like you will only be charged for like the inference time itself. So that's like probably the most comparable. Hugging Face does have a inference endpoints, but just in my experience of using it, it's not very good. It's either like very slow, like you're running it on CPUs, or if you do rent like a GPU, you have to keep the space like running and stuff. This is a something that we're really excited about pushing forward, just because it'll enable anyone to run it.
You can do it in other places, but I reckon there isn't anywhere else in the world that you can do it, and then there's an incentivization mechanism that's forcing the speed of inference on that same model that you're hosting at the same time, right?
Sure, and that's another cool thing that this update really lets us shine with is there's no more glass ceiling on our incentive mechanism. Like there's no theoretical max a miner can get. We can always keep pushing out new models, and miners are always incentivized to figure out new ways to spin up models. What's the fastest way to manage this fleet of models? We hope to get to a point where eventually I want to be able to post a model on Targon Hub, which is where a lot of the validators currently look to see what models they should run to stay in consensus best. But I would love to see miners really start to figure out how they can, the second a new model gets pushed to Targon Hub, or like the second that someone leases a new model, miners are already ready and running that model. I think that there's so much room for miners to innovate here. The skill ceiling really has just gone up exponentially. It's been really cool to see how our miners are reacting to this. And I'm super excited once we really get organics deep in here and start scoring organics much heavier than synthetics to seeing what we can build with this. I think we're going to be able to build some really, really cool stuff.
So I'm a bit of a geek, and there's also a lot of subnet owners and developers in the chat and in the audience here. Like, can we talk technicals? Like, how did you do this? Because this is no easy feat.
Sure. So the Python or Docker has actually some pretty good it has a pretty good SDK for Python specifically. And I've been working with Docker ever since I got into programming in general. I found it within like a year of starting getting into programming and had a good bit of experience with it. And once you know a lot of the fundamentals of how Docker containers work, specifically not Docker Compose, but actual just Docker itself, like what's the difference between an image versus a container, image hashes, all these different things, labels. If you have a good understanding of that, it translates to Python in their Python SDK really, really, really well. And you can start to get pretty confident with having a Python application control all these other systems. So our validator itself will start up a Docker client, which is essentially your central control point for spinning up Docker containers, pulling them down, whatever. And then from there, we use, I believe I have Python run the NVIDIA SMI command on the host, and then grab the output and then parse that output as text. And so from that, we can grab how many GPUs there are on the validator, how much memory is free on those GPUs, and then what the total memory is on each of those GPUs. And then we can use that list to then say, okay, well, if I have 40 gigs on GPU 4, then I can run this 12 gig model on GPU 4. And then we say, okay, let's spin up a Docker image, and we have all these different environment variables. I'll tell the Docker image it specifically needs to run on that GPU. And then the validator itself will keep a list of what Docker images it knows about. And that's another part of the process is when it starts up, it'll scan all the Docker images that are labeled with a label that we put on those Docker images. So that way, if say someone is running a subtensor on their machine that's running our validator code will not touch their other Docker images. It will only manage Docker images that it sees has labels that it would have put on those images. So that, for instance, we put the port number as a label. We put the model that it's running as a label, and then I believe we also set the image name as the model it's running. So there's various techniques we can use to when it starts up, see what's running, and then after it's running, see what else it needs to be running, start those containers, and then keep track of all that in memory as like a model to port mapping. One of the other things it does is when the container starts up, we add a health check. So as the container is starting up, it takes time for these model weights to get into memory. And so before the validator starts querying people, it'll wait and check each Docker image until it sees that the model weights have been loaded into memory and the API endpoint has started up that we can send a verification request to. And then once that's up and running, we know for sure the LLM has started up, the weights are in memory, it's alive, it's all good to go. And then at the same time, we can make sure that if it took too long or if it failed to start up for whatever reason, if there wasn't enough GPU memory for whatever reason, the validator itself will know and be able to not use that one and like kind of remove it from its memory.
So is this then advertised to the chain? So the validator says to the chain, like, I'm running this, I'm validating this model and this model and this model, and these are on my.
Nope. There's no gossip. Each validator is fully independently controlled on what models they want to query miners with. So if some other validator wanted to validate on our subnet and they really want to build a business out of code completion, and they have this really good private code not private code completion model, they have this really good code completion model that they really want miners to run, and let's say they're running on like a big H100 or an A100. That validator will then convince other miners to run that one model, and now they'll have access to just that one model, and they don't necessarily need any other validator to be running that. They just need some miners to pay attention to them and run that model.
How do the miners know that they're running those models?
When the validator starts up, after all the Docker images have been loaded, the validator will go through every miner in the network and then ping them and say, hey, I'm this validator, and these are the models I could potentially ask you for. And then right after that's done, we'll then go back through, or actually at the same time, I believe, we'll first tell them what models we have, and then right after that, we'll ask them what models they're running. And then the miners themselves, it's up to them to implement the logic of responding with what models they're running and intaking what models we're requesting. And so this is where I see a lot of innovation on the miner side. I would love to see some miners that do the same sort of Docker setup where we can ping them that, hey, I want these models, and they instantly spin up some Docker images off the bat. That would be really, really, really cool to see. And I think honestly, there's some miners out there that can do it, and we have the boilerplate code in our validator now. Essentially, they can go rip it out.
So one thing that comes to mind in this design is that the miners will be limited in some sense by the GPU sizes of the validators, right? Whether or not the validators are very incentivized to run a lot of machines is kind of up for is really a question on a lot of people's minds right now. So is there a way of moving past this system where you put more work onto the miners and the validators don't have to run a replica in memory of every model that they're validating? Is there a way that you can imagine that working in the future? Do you understand the question?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And this is something we've thought of, and we already have a solution for it. It's just a matter of us implementing it. I think the biggest thing we want to focus on right now is getting organics in. I really think that's our next top priority is really getting these organics weighted really heavily. And once we have that, we plan on doing model scheduling. So the validators will keep an internal schedule of all the different models they could potentially run, and then we'll use the same sort of Docker system to dynamically spin up and down in real time different models. So let's say a validator could have 10 different models ranging from, let's say, 30 gigabytes to 12 gigabytes each, and they're running on a single A100. The validator would just do some math and figure out, okay, I'm going to send requests synthetic and score organic, or I'm going to send synthetic requests for every type of model, but then I can spin up any given model and then ask or keep my own records of the synthetics I've sent from that synthetic model, or get queries from our little node that we were talking about earlier, where validators can ping it and say, hey, I'm currently running this model. Can you give me some organic queries from this model? And then we can send them those back, and then they can validate those really easily. So it's essentially, instead of having all the models running at the same time, you just spin up a model, validate on that model for a little bit, spin it down, spin up the next model, validate on that model, and rinse repeat. But without the miners knowing, like, you'll always query the miners on different random models. So yes, that's our solution for that.
Effectively, you don't require fully redundant deterministic validation. You use a sort of pseudo-random design, which I think is, my guess is you don't need to have 100% redundancy to still get what you need. We don't
have to verify every single response. And again, this is why we want to really start scoring organics harder. Is we already have an insane amount of throughput. Like, it's in the realm of, like, again, billions of tokens a month we're sending these miners. So they're getting plenty of challenges. And one of the cool things is organics look extremely similar to synthetics. They're a little easier to tell for various reasons. Our top miners all know, we've talked with all of them. They'll see us doing rate limit tests and seeing how hard we can hit them. And we've had some of them come back and put in throttles on us, rate limiting us in return, which has been funny. But yeah, they're all ready to handle such an insane amount of tokens. There's no reason to validate all of them. And once we start validating these organics, it'll really put the pressure on them to never, ever miss a query, or else they'll get essentially zeroed out.
Properly generating synthetic requests that match well with organics is a really difficult task. How are you guys creating these synthetic queries? Like, what's your pipeline? What's your style?
So before I answer that, I would actually counter with, synthetics are important, but I think the way I really view synthetics is that they're a jump start, or they're used to
it's like an engine start.
it's like an engine start to get these, like, new miners that have zero incentive up to a point where they're eligible to have organics. And then that's where organics would take over, and we wouldn't even really use much of any synthetics on them. And at that rate, they're incentivized to respond to synthetics, no matter how good or bad or close to an organic it looks like. Because once they get hit with an organic, that's when the real game starts. And if you can't survive organics, you're not going to survive an ecosystem.
Right.
With that said, right now we use, I forget what exactly the data set is, but I think it's 9 million rows, 60 million rows, something of sorts. It's a very large data set. And then we take that data set, generate it, or we grab one of the questions from it. We run it through one of the models that you're using to verify. So actually, like if I query you with a like let's say meta model, I'll actually create a question from the question in the data set from that model first. So I'll say, hey, LLM, pretend you're a search engine, or pretend you're like some person, and make a question similar to this question I'm giving you that would be formatted in this way. And then your name is going to be this name from this country, just to add a little bit of extra noise. And then the LLM will come back with a more random question. So it has a little more noise. So we turn up the temperature a good bit. So this way it's really hard to detect, or really it's very rare for there to be duplicates because we're running it through this LLM with high temperature first. Plus you have like the different name in different country. And then we'll take that question, format it again, and then send it out to miners as a synthetic. And then in that whole process, we'll also change questions will either be sent as chat completions or as regular completions. So miners are actually getting challenged on both possible endpoints too.
And it's very, it's going to be great to have this data set of organic requests as well as the organic seed, randomness seed for these questions when you're doing synthetics later on, right? You can use the actual distribution of questions as, as the random seed generates later on.
Yeah, absolutely. We could make our own data set out of these organics for sure. Yeah, we have, I think right now, then even with the synthetic data, we could build a data set off of all the challenges we've sent to miners. Again, have that level of randomness from being sent through an LLM in the first place. And we currently save every single response, or every single challenge and response from every single miner and every single validator. I think right now we have somewhere in the realm of 700 gigabytes of responses and challenge requests. And it's been really cool to watch that database grow and see how miners respond over time, and seeing all the stats, and also figure out how to use indexes properly and manage a database of that size. It's been really interesting.
Great. Cool, Josh. All right, well, let's move on to the there's more on this slide, so let's dive in.
Yeah, so our last slide, our roadmap for moving forward. We want to build a general LLM inference service. It's what Targon Hub is aiming to be, and we'll build it out to be. And like we talked about, users will be able to lease models from validators. We're hoping to compete with Together AI, Open Router. These are just companies where they basically plug into people that offer LLM inference, and we're hoping to just basically, the miners will be the providers, and we can say, hey, I want this model, and our miners will spin up that model and start serving it. General OpenAI schema compliant. We already have a lot of this done.
I think that's done. Yeah.
It's done mostly. There's still some things we want to add in. One of the big things I was talking with some miners about is OpenAI already has a standard for listing models that are available. So I want to change our miner endpoint itself to have the same format. I think that would be cool. And then there's a couple other things. I know we need Targon Hub. Apparently some applications have built in, for whatever reason, API key parsing, and our API keys on Targon Hub are not exactly like OpenAI keys. So need to fix that. But we're pretty close to being like 100% OpenAI compliant, so that's really cool. And then one of our future goals that we've talked about too is achieve at least 75% organic scoring percentage of how many organics we're scoring to synthetics. I think that'll be a massive step for us and the ecosystem as a whole, just being able to have a product living on bittensor that truly is being used, and miners are being scored on real people using the product. And then one last big thing that we have to announce is a new project we've been working on internally called validator voting. Rob, do you want to explain this?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we've been thinking about, a lot of the frustrations that a lot of new subnets have, or subnet owners in general, when it comes to the sort of opacity in terms of like how validators are setting weights. And we've seen innovations come out of like Miner Union and Datura, where it lets people set their own weights based off of their stake. This is analogous to like STAO, which is like a precursor or predecessor to DTAO. But not all validators have implemented this. And so we've built at Validator Voting on our GitHub, an open source version of this so that any validator can be able to run their own sort of STAO, just like how Datura and Miners Union have. We think that this is really positive for bittensor. And so we're really excited to release this as an open source project. We're still doing some work on it, right? But obviously we want to work closely with the validators that do want to implement this so that they can remain competitive with Datura and Miners Union. And yeah, we're really excited about building out Targon Hub and really trying to drive, like it's for us, like if you think about what we do for the miners, right? We define these objective metrics that they need to maximize. And so for us, it's kind of the same way where now as Manifold, right, our objective is to maximize organic tokens, right? So right now, if like, for example, on OpenRouter, they're doing about 60 billion tokens a week in organic, responses across, 200 different models, right? Well, we want to be able to do, 10 times that, 600 billion tokens organic across 200 models. And so, that's kind of like a mission that Manifold's embarking on. So, really, really exciting updates here from us. And shout out to Josh. Do we have another slide? Or no, that's the end of the slideshow. Yo, shout out Josh.
Shout out. Well done, Josh. Very cool to see that you're pushing into the open source implementation of the STAO design that Muv created. The Muv revolution is upon us. So the idea here is basically like anybody can take this and run this on their validator and it'll just automatically turn it into an STAO validator.
Yeah, exactly. So, or it's just it works very similar to how Datura and Miners Unions work. So, like, if you're a validator right now, you could run this and allow people to delegate to your validator, and then vote for the weighting on the subnet that you like or that you prefer. I think that this is and I know price talk is banned in the Discord, so I'm not going to do price talk, but I will talk slight tokenomics, where it's like, okay, if you incentivize people to hold their TAO by voting for the subnets they like, I think that this has positive action on the price. Now, obviously, we're not talking about price, but I'm just saying that we think that it's a really good thing for bittensor to kind of allow people to have a voice, no matter how big or small you are. We think it's really important to allow, Josh has massive form. This guy works out, But so we do think that these types of implementations, shout out to Miners Union. Love those guys. I think that what they did was a really great idea, and it's really powerful for not just for themselves, but also for the entire bittensor ecosystem. If you look at the benefits for the validators that are here on the call, if you look at the benefits of implementing this, Datura received, I think, almost 200,000 TAO in delegation in a week from implementing that, which is hugely beneficial to their validator, right? So by empowering people and giving them a voice. So, I would say that it's a net positive for validators. It's a net positive for the community, giving them a voice, and overall a net positive for the project.
I think so too. I think that we wanted to implement this meta on the chain, and then we decided that we think it's kind of an intermediate step before dynamic TAO. So let's not just do two massive upgrades. Let's just do one massive upgrade. But then we were very happy to see it actually just be implemented on the top of bittensor, right? Like you can't hold back a good idea. You can't hold back people from trying to build open source alternatives and ways of organizing ourselves, I think that will explode when we bring smart contracts to the chain in the next little while. That being said,
Yeah,
I do think that it game theoretically will explode at a certain point, and it won't last too long. That's my perspective. That's my opinion. But I am actually really interested to see how it plays out. And at least people are a lot of new participants in the weight allocation decision are getting a choice now, and so that's I think the most positive thing is like, hey, let's get rid of the oligarchs and let's see what can be done at a different level. So hell yeah, yeah. Shout out to Muv.
Shout out to Muv. We love Muv. Yeah, so we're in terms of what we're doing, like on Targon Hub, we're working on maybe getting, bridging that to like hub.civil.com. We want to release a new upgrade for Targon Hub here shortly. Don't want to say too much on that yet, but we've been working very hard on that. Some of the guys here at the table. And so, really like just increasing, like, I saw some activity on Twitter and some conversations on Twitter the other day where it's like people are asking for front ends and like, how can I use bittensor and these sorts of things, right? And we really want to like take bittensor to the next level in terms of its usage. And one of the best ways to do that is by integrating with all of these different applications that are using OpenAI right now. If you go and you look at like on OpenRouter, right? I mean, what is it, LLM Tavern or Silly Tavern is, doing, billions of tokens a day in organic queries, right? And so how can we go out and get those people using, Targon Hub or another validator service on bittensor such that the number of people that are using bittensor in like a very, organic, natural way increases. So this is what we're really focused on. And Targon V4 has been a really great push. Thank you, Josh. Let's get a round of applause for Josh, Awesome. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Are we going to get to see this on Cursor anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, so Cursor has a bug in it right now. I can share my screen to where it works. Like we have it working right now. Let me, okay, let me share my screen really quick. Okay, what is going on? Sorry about this, y'all. Man, I usually never have such technical issues, right? But here's some code really quick. So here, as you can see, this was a model that we just leased. I actually don't know if any miners have picked it up yet, but this is a coding model, 7 billion coding model that we just leased. But we do know that Hermes 3 is working. So as you can see, if you want to plug it into Cursor, you can, change your OpenAI base URL to hubapi.civil.com. There is an issue with the way that the verify API keys is working right now inside of Cursor. We shot them an email because when you click verify, it says failed to fetch, right? But on our API, we don't get it. So it says if, and we ran this command and it worked. So we sent them an email. But like, let's say I have this page right here. We have Alex at Manifold Inc. This is, kind of doxing some code here real quick for the new Targon Hub. But so I can just say remove Alex and replace it with Robert, and then hit enter, and then it's always live demos that break. It literally just worked. Oh wait, hold on. Let's see. And then okay, yeah. So then I click that, and then yeah, boom. And then there you go. So it made the change right there in Cursor. So this is using the Hermes 3 that's running on Subnet 4 right now and going through the hub proxy. So this is something that, you can integrate with Cursor as soon as Cursor updates that issue with the verify because it won't save the API keys. But other than that, it works. That's
amazing.
Yeah, so it works in Cursor. It works in pretty much anything that uses the OpenAI package works with this. So all you have to do is go to targon.civil.com, sign up with an account. You'll get 10,000 credits for free. And yeah, you could start using it immediately. And very shortly, once we get this code that you guys see right here, right now, online, here in like the next week or two, you'll be able to lease the models yourselves, pay the validators that are running the hub to run whichever model you'd like. And yeah, so it works in Cursor right now. And works in every OpenAI application. So now this next phase is like build out business development, get sales teams. That's kind of the next phase of what we're going to be working on at Manifold. So yeah, Open Tensor on 3.
Maybe at the end of the call. Wicked, guys. Yeah, like that seamless integration with things like Cursor is going to make all the difference for getting these billions of tokens across the finish line into people's computers, etc. And getting a wide variety of models is going to be fantastic as well. Like, I think this is probably the first time where we can compete with something like Open Router, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and also we can plug directly into Open Router. So Subnet 4 can be a provider on Open Router as well, right? So that's also a really great place to get organic tokens. So Alex, if you're listening to the call, we're not competitors. Let's be friends. Yo, hit my line.
Yeah, I can reach out to him. Let me invite him to the call right now.
Yeah.
No,
well, we called him. We talked to their team a couple weeks ago to become a provider there. So, but also, we'll on Targon Hub, you'll be able to access it no matter what. But really, like, once we have hundreds of models, like the whole pipeline I imagine for BitTensor right now is like you go to like a macrocosmos like fine tuning subnet, you fine tune a model based off your data set and whatnot. Once that fine tuning job is done, you upload it to Hugging Face. Then you put the Hugging Face ID into Targon Hub, and now you've just gone from fine tuning. You could take the pre-trained model from Subnet 9, fine tune that model on 37, and then deploy that for inference on Subnet 4. This is kind of the vision that I see kind of playing out here on BitTensor, and so really just trying to drive that outcome as much as we can, and really hammer that into the ground, like really try to get that done. We think that we'll have all this ready to go by the end of the quarter, where we're good, doing, our goal is to do at least 60 billion tokens a week, by the end of the quarter. But obviously I want to hit 1 trillion if we can. So
hoorah. Great. Okay, well, why don't we close down this, guys? That was an awesome presentation. But if you want to stay up on the stage, Sammy and I, we're going to have a bit of a debate. Anybody else who wants to come on stage is welcome. We're going to talk about root network emissions. Rob, you might have some perspective on this. Some thoughts.
I always got perspective for you, And Josh he can flex in the, Yeah, look at this guy. He can lift weight heavy. It's sick.
We should get Nick up here as well.
Yeah, where's Nick? I can see him. There you go. Let's get Nick up.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Okay, so everyone's welcome to jump up on stage and participate in the conversation. But let me frame the conversation question. Going back almost a year when we first proposed dynamic tau, the original design didn't have a root network at all. The root network was removed. So for those of you that have played the RAO games, one can imagine what it would be like in a situation where there was no root network. Well, specifically, you would have to stake into a subnet that has a Uniswap pool between your balance and the tau that's staked. And there's no quote unquote risk-free option by staking into subnet 0. Now, by bringing that in, we allayed a lot of fears from people in the community that were worried about, not understanding how they would be able to play this game, and worried about the fact that they would just be dominated by power users, and still wanting to participate in the staking process of BitTensor. So we brought the root network in, And this allowed individuals to stake onto root, and their weight in the root network would be reflected in all of the subnets on bittensor. I'll explain how that would occur mathematically. But it would then allow them to still make dividends as like almost airdrops across all of the 64 to 1024 subnets on bittensor, giving you an APY without your principal being affected or at any point at risk in the ecosystem. One of the consequences of the design also is that if you stake on root alone, because of the way that we calculate the stake weight in the consensus algorithm of any subnet, it's 50% comes from the local subnet token, and 50% comes from a global calculation of all of your holdings across all subnets, including root. This meant that if you only had root, your dividends would be about 50% lower than somebody that had actually allocated 100% of their tau into all of the subnets on bittensor. So there's still an incentive to participate in dynamic tau, to be within inside of the subnets, but there is a lower APY if you don't participate, and a higher APY if you do. In the game, you could say that we're creating. One more thing here is that if we do allow root, then that stake counts as economic security inside of the subnets, whereas if we were to remove the risk-free option, a lot of people might just hold their tau off of any staking account, and because of that, the economic security, which is what the proof of stake inside of each of the subnets, would be reduced by how much tau is no longer staked into the on-risk positions inside the network. So there's the framework, but we were talking about this in RAO, and I think it's a reasonable conversation to have on stage with the other participants: Nick, Sammy, Fish, Dave Fields, Josh, Caro. Yeah, I'll step back.
Before you pass it off, could you describe at a high level what happens with the tau that's staked to root? Like, how does that load to the subnets? I think that would be very valuable.
Right. Okay. So inside of a subnet, we apply Yuma consensus. And Yuma consensus is a proof of stake, proof of work hybrid, which pays miners for proof of work. That's the incentive term, right? And it pays validators for being in consensus. That's the dividend term. And the combination of those terms is emission, E. Now, the incentive to stay in alignment comes from the dividends. And basically, it pays the validators for being close to the consensus. Now, it pays them in proportion to the amount of stake they have. So if I have 1 million tau and you have 100,000 tau, I'll have 10 times the amount of emission in terms of dividends from my 1 million stake. So people are familiar with that concept. And it needs to be roughly linear, or else the validators will have no incentive to stay in consensus, and therefore would just arbitrarily pick miners and send them emission effectively. So in the dynamic tau world, there is the local stake inside of a subnet: alpha, beta, delta, epsilon, gamma, etc. If we purely ran the proof of stake inside of a subnet, the economic security, like the economic security, comes from the total, dollar terms cost it would take to accumulate 51% of the stake weight in a network, is split by the number of subnets effectively, right? On average, it'll be 1/64 times less economic security inside of a subnet, because all of the value has been split across all of these different tokens. And so inside of the original paper, the way that we solve this problem is by having the weight that a validator gets inside of a subnet to be equivalent to a combination of two terms. One term being basically the proportion of the alpha token that you have relative to everyone else. So, if I have 10% of alpha tokens, that value would be 0.1. And the other term would be effectively the sum total of all of my subnet tokens everywhere else when denominated in tau. And the combination of those two terms would give you weight because you had subnet tokens everywhere. And also would mean that the economic security of a subnet was only half, right? Because 50% of the weight in the consensus came from everywhere rather than just locally. So you would actually be slightly more than half because it would be also the economic security of the alpha token and the beta token. Because we need to give dividends in proportion to the weight, this means that we would give dividends in proportion to your global weight in the subnet, right? So this other section of what gives you weight inside of a subnet, the global term, being 50% of the weight, would then acquire 50% of the dividends. So 50% of the dividends inside of a subnet go to everybody in the entire network, let's say. When you include the root network, if I'm holding, say, 1 million tau on the root network, and that's, say, like 50% of all the tau everywhere else, I would get 25% of the dividends in every subnet, right? Because half, 1 million over 2 million, divided by 50% of the dividends, right? So that's the structure. And like maybe Sammy, you have some questions about why and how, or if you want to dive down into a little bit more of the mathematics.
Yeah, so effectively does going back to your example, if somebody was to stake 1 million tau to the root network, is that evenly split across all the subnets, and then within a subnet also evenly split across all the validators, or does it just default to one validator? And
Let's imagine this is an example. Let's imagine that there's only me and you, Sammy, and I am exclusively staking my 1 million tau. I don't have 1 million tau, but let's say I was staking. There's only 2 million tau, and you have 1 million, and I have the other 1 million, and I'm staking it entirely into root, and you have split it across the two subnets in bittensor. So you have 500,000 tau and 500,000 tau in the other subnet. Does that make sense? You can imagine the situation.
Yeah.
Right. So your global weight is the same as mine, right? So you would get a score of 0.5 for the global term in every subnet, right? Because you have 1 million tau, I have 1 million tau, and there's 2 million tau, and there's 1.5. So that's 0.5. Does it make sense? Right.
Yeah.
But the difference is that you have 100% of both alpha and beta, right? So your stake weight is actually 1 plus 0.5 over 2. So you actually have 75% of the stake weight in both subnets, and I only have 25. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So your dividends, even though you have 1 million tau and I have 1 million tau, your dividends will actually be 3 times as large as mine.
Okay, so I guess thinking about it like this, the tau that's staked to the root network isn't actually being sent into the liquidity pools of each subnet evenly, right? It's more of just the global tau term that's allowing them to generate the yield.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So there will be for your whole basket of goods, you own some subnet tokens all over the place, but you also have some root. There'll be a way of calculating how much tau that's all worth.
Yeah.
And
so
that's carried with you everywhere.
Yeah. So the point you raised about how, stake on the root network, adds value in the sense of economic security is a great point. But the fact that these root stakers are earning yield as well, and a large amount of yield just for that economic security, and they're not even the tau that they're contributing isn't even deepening liquidity within the liquidity pools. And at the same time, if they do choose to sell, it almost seems like it hurts the subnet owners more than it does benefit them, kind of in the long run.
I'm actually not so worried about the sell pressure versus the buy pressure for the subnet tokens. it will reach some equilibrium, and then people will be making market decisions based upon that equilibrium, whether or not it sums to one or not. The issue, I think, is more that there's all of this liquidity that is, as you said, like not in the liquidity pools, not participating in the mechanism, not really helping us produce a functioning market. It's just kind of sitting there, right? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, I guess you articulated my worry a lot better. So like it's not really helping the whole detail system run. Like initially I was imagining that if you did stake to root, then the tau would flow into the subnets or into the subnet liquidity pools, and it'd be adding value in that sense, like helping the system basically operate more smoothly. But it sounds like that's not really happening either.
Not really possible. Otherwise, if it goes into a liquidity pool, it becomes available for people to purchase at all sorts of different prices, and therefore, they might as well just be participating. The original design, like if we can think through the implications of the design. So in the design where there is no root network, if you have tau and you're seeking an APY, you must allocate it to effectively potentially highly volatile assets. Like we don't know exactly what the volatility will be. It's hard to determine, but like we all know that there will be risk implied, and it's not obvious how that game will play out. So many people don't want to play that game, and so there will be a lot of tau that is already not, you could say, participating. That will just be like and in fact I know large holders that will just go, look, I'm just going to hold it on my balance, right? So that loss of liquidity might just be a consequence of the design altogether. Sammy, does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess like one way I was thinking about it was that if there was no option to earn any type of like passive risk-free yield, then maybe holders would say take 5% of their total holdings and like participate within DTAO in that sense. But like if there's some option which allows them and again, I don't know from like the simulations that you've run how attractive that yield will be, but if it's 50% less than the max DTAO yield, like it sounds like that could be like very attractive, like much higher than what we have right now. Is that correct?
If nobody participates in DTAO, then the person who does will get exorbitant APY. Let's put it that way, right? Now that doesn't last very long because the dividends that are being made by people on root are actually becoming subnet tokens, right? So, but if everyone is always unstaking, the APY for the person that holds the subnet tokens would just be, it would be 50% of the inflation of bittensor itself, right? So I don't know what that is, and it could effectively be infinitely high, right? Because they could, if they're just the only person who participates and stakes $1 and no one else does, then anyways, you can do the math.
One cons, I put something in the RAO channel to sort of put an example to that, kind of assuming like 10, 30, 50% participation, because I do think that's a really important consideration in what's going to drive participation rates in DTAO. So if you have a scenario where 10% of people are participating in DTAO and 90% are not, the people participating in DTAO on average are making 11x the emissions of people sitting in global. And even at 50% participation rates, you're still making 3x. So I think that that's, to me, feels like a very meaningful driver of participation rates. Versus sort of just getting, because you won't get 50% of what others are getting that are participating. It would be significantly less, especially in like the early participation days.
Those are really nice numbers, Dave, but they're not exactly right, because one needs to keep in mind that the people on root are actually also making dividends in the subnet tokens themselves, right? So it's this is actually something that we perhaps should do simulations around, Dave.
Well, it's
I have
it's
the thought.
quantifiable.
It's
If
quantifiable.
validators have 41% of the emissions, and within the subnet, the people who have the RAO, the alpha tokens, getting 50% of the stake weight, they're getting assuming prices are summing to 1, they're getting about 1,500 tau worth of value per day, and that just gets split among the amount of people that are within the subnets holding the alpha tokens.
Yeah. And also people that are holding root, right? That regulates that somewhat.
Well, no, it's 1,500 just for the people holding the alpha tokens, and then 1,500 for the people not holding alpha tokens.
Right.
Yeah, so the numbers are a little simplified, Cons, just because but we've sort of been doing some of this simulation stuff. I mean, I think it would be great to do some more detailed simulations around it, because yes, it will counterbalance it a little bit, but the investment in sort of the the alpha tokens, I mean, your 10% participation rate isn't going to drive up enormously with emissions over the course of a few days or a few weeks, right? Over time, it will, but those holding global stake might also be immediate sellers, right? Of the tokens.
Yes, and this was another thing that we were speaking about, Sammy, is like what will the likely strategy be for these participants that are purely on root, and like you were suggesting that it'll probably just be unstake all, immediate unstake all, and I was saying that you probably wouldn't want to do an immediate unstake all.
Yeah, I think to your point, if like, let's take a fund that has a large tau position, if they are bullish on the tau ecosystem, then it might not make sense to just like insta dump. But if we're assuming that like these root stakers aren't really going to be like deep into the actual ecosystem, then when it comes time to actually like take their profits, or say like coming up on end of the year, they want to lock some gains in, I don't think they're going to have the expertise to like determine, okay, like this subnet's a scam, or this one is like Targon is the leading inference subnet. It's more of just going to be like a sell all rather than like sell subnet XYZ and keep the rest. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's probably true. However, I think there are a large number of people, perhaps in this crowd, and we can maybe hear in the chat, that like even if you were taking the risk-free option, would you participate in unstaking your funds from certain subnets that you think were positive or negative? Like it's sort of like a halfway point, Sammy.
Yeah, I guess the argument I'm making is that they're not going to know which subnets are positive and negative, so it's just going to be like, okay, cool, we got some free yield. Let me just sell everything now.
Yeah, imagine
So-
if, I think like if you got airdrop free tokens that you have never heard of before, chances are you're probably just going to sell it because you never heard of it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you have enough knowledge to be speculating in the detail market, like you're going to be playing the detail game, not participating passively and then like half playing it.
Yeah, so I think what you guys are getting at is like it's a safe assumption to assume that root stakers are just going to sell all subnet tokens. You know, it might not be immediately, but when it comes time to like make a decision, are you guys also like behind the idea that most likely it'll just be a sell all?
I think you convinced me, Const, that it's not not everybody's going to be insta dumping. That it's probably going to be a lot of people holding all. But I agree with Sammy that the decision is going to be sell all or keep all in the vast majority of cases.
Yeah, I reckon that's true. However, there are a lot of pretty major holders in the BitTensor ecosystem that won't want to actively play the game, but follow BitTensor pretty closely. And I mean, this is effectively a moot point. Like, it's not an argument. It's just something that I imagine will happen. Is that they'll be like, "Oh, I don't know this subnet. I've never heard of them." Whereas, "Oh, I'm going to keep it in, Targon," and because I've heard they're doing something, right, rather than nothing. So I also think that there will be a lot more marketing happening on behalf of subnets, which could be good or bad. And that may sway people's opinions. Like even in the periphery of their mind, they might choose to participate slightly in the market dynamics of DTAO, and they can do so in a very risk free way. Whereas, like, I'm not going to ever trade in the stock market, maybe, but hey, I've heard of Nvidia, so I'm going to hold on to that.
Yeah,
Like-
that's fair, Collins, especially if like the landscape ends up like a Pareto distribution and there's like a handful of subnets whose names become very well known and the teams operating them also there's reputation behind the team, such as Macrocosmos, the Manifold Labs. They might choose to just hold those subnets and then sell whatever they haven't heard of.
Yeah.
I don't really agree with this. I think like the vast majority of tokens are going to be passively staked. They're going to be staked by funds, and funds are not going to like do independent diligence, even to a minimal extent on every subnet. I mean, you're going to have to run through investment committee or whatever if you want to hold on to one of these subnet tokens. Like they're just going to say, for the sake of ease, just dump it all, or we do that and then we participate in DTAO actively.
Right.
Do you think there will be? Do you think there will be
it's
bittensor only fund?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question, Dave.
Do you think there will be bittensor only funds where the validators essentially acts as a fund, and they're, instead of investing in other portfolio company, their portfolio companies like universe would just be all the subnets?
I mean, I think this is for sure going to happen. We've seen what Muv built, right? Like Muv will do a fund, I'm sure. Can we hear from Muv in the chat?
We need DTFs, DTAO traded funds.
Nice.
I mean, anything
Oh,
possible.
they're happening. They're happening.
It's going to happen. So, I mean, like, will they perform better than the index? I'm not sure. I actually kind of think that there'll be a lot of mean retention in the initial design. So people that are trying to trade in and outside of that may not perform well. There's things are converging in some sense towards a steady state. It's very exciting. I don't know for you guys, but for me, it's like the most exciting thing. Just when we get to see this play out, like a lot of us are excited. We're excited that OTF. Like, just had to say that.
Yeah, I think another thing it's going to push for is that I think a lot of the detail will be more evaluated, more aligned with kind of like public equities or tokens, where people are going to be asking for KPIs or more data from each individual subnets. So I think we're probably going to see more subnets releasing more data, more dashboards, trying to appeal to the public, like, hey, here's our metrics, here's our KPIs, and we've been improving on, I don't know, revenue, expenses, research metrics that we're trying to optimize, that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
Let's
Cons,
bring it back.
I have one other question on kind of the detail stuff that we haven't talked about in a little while, which is sort of the initiation sort of moment for the subnets.
Yes.
Is that something we could chat about for a minute?
Yes. Let's do it.
Because one thing that I'm concerned about is sort of that initiation moment, because it will actually be like a very low liquidity moment for the subnets. And I know there's been talk about the initial lock cost being what drives it. Other subnet owners have wanted it to be as low as like 100 tau. I think that's something we should really explore and do some simulations around. But if you just think about like 100 tau initialization of the subnet, for someone to get more than 100 tau, worth of their alpha token will be very easy to do. So the more tau someone initiates into their subnet, kind of the more liquidity there will be in that pool. And so I've sort of been thinking about whether it might make sense for subnet owners to actually have an ability to invest as much tau as they would like into the inception moment. Maybe there's a cap, maybe there's some lockups, but I think that's a really important thing. And I've seen some of these ecosystems like DSO and FriendTech, where that initiation moment kind of was done poorly. and it really created some problems for the longevity of the chain.
Yeah, it is actually the most difficult thing, and unfortunately, like unlike us, when we launched bittensor, it was very organic, but if a lot more people had been watching, right, maybe we wouldn't have been able to even mine our own token. So like, thankfully, it was very grassroots. It won't be the same with subnets on bittensor. There'll be like a whole market of people, a whole group of miners that are going to jump on your subnets initially and try to mine them from inception and things like this. So we have not finalized that very core problem of the design, but where I have leaned to more in talks with subnet owners is actually just to stick with the 18%, or something around 18%. So then it really becomes less of a question for a subnet owner about how they're going to mine their initial subnet, what they're going to lock or unlock or inject, and how much they're going to buy initially, because these questions become very, very difficult for people to answer, and it becomes a really difficult economic question for someone to answer alongside the problem of, how am I just going to, make a really well-functioning design on bittensor. This actually came from Will from Macrocosmos. He said just like leave it at 18%, and then a subnet owner will know like how much they're going to have after X amount of time. It does irk me, the arbitrary nature of a number like 18%, and it actually does come up to be a very, very large proportion of the initial token distribution for a subnet owner, which could be negative for the project itself, if that makes sense, Dave. But there's just consistency and obviousness and simplicity to something like that might be really good. However, we really still are iterating on that design. Okay, so to your point though, like letting the subnet owner buy as much as they want, at what price? That's always the question. And if it's like 1/n for the subnets, what you can do very easily is just buy all of the initial distribution of your token, right? And like if it really is 1/n, like we read this a number of times, like for 1,000 tau, if there's 100 subnets, it's 100,000 initial, and then the 100,000 initial becomes like 700,000 of this subnet token by the end of the year out of 1 million, right? So do you see how it can kind of get out of control if you let people modulate that term?
Yeah, no, and I think it's why the simulations around it are critical, because part of what I mean, DSO is one that I'm very familiar with. I was actually kind of an early investor there, and the initial sort of moment with BitClout, people were sort of able to get in before kind of the public, which was super problematic. But even just having sort of that early release moment, and there were sort of all of these creator coins that were, driven up by handfuls of people who were in first, you then started to attract other, people into the ecosystem, and it was a real, sort of negative on kind of entrance into it. So I just think it's important consideration. I mean, the 18% makes some sense to me, as a starting point, but I think it's a really worthwhile thing to run a number of simulations around. We're doing some stuff in that area, and I'm happy to share what we kind of come up with there.
Yeah, for sure. There is also another aspect here where we do believe that it might make sense to allow subnet owners to choose the point where they turn on the emissions for their subnet in conjunction with the 18%, or even to turn it down or up, to pick the point where they want to have a minor inflation in their network, which would allow them to actually just buy the token continuously and not have other people dilute them, except for the other people that are buying it, right? So it very quickly becomes a market-based thing. If in that event, right, if everybody just buys the token from this initial liquidity, and you bought it yourself and you can't get it anymore, that's because people have bought it and you can sell, right? So you can't lose in that design as a subnet owner, right? So yeah, these things are super, super really good questions, Dave. Thank you so much for bringing it up.
Hey, Jake. Quick question about the turning up and down on the emission, right? My understanding is that if you turn down the emission, it's only for the miners. The validators still get their full take, right?
We think it'd be better if everybody were to lose out, both validators, subnet owners, and miners.
Yeah. Likewise, I think that's a good idea. I was just telling Alex, I was like, this is a really important. I think this is a really important tool. Like if you push an update, right, like on V4, right, and maybe there's like a exploit that you didn't catch, right, turning down the emission, right, and then almost like a Fed funds rate, like where it's like a lever, where it's like, okay, we know that the subnet is working really well, the code is like bona fide, there's no exploits, like we can up the incentive or the emission that's going out so that we can attract more miners, right? But if there's like a glut of miners, I don't know if we're going to keep the 256 on the miner side or like the UID limit, but imagine like it's an infinite amount of miners, right? You could increase the emission to 100% and then you could get a lot more miners, right? But then it's like, okay, we have too many miners, right? So it allows for I think it's an important tool to have for as a subnet owner.
Yeah. I agree. And I think one of the reasons why we want that mechanism in place is just from it comes from the fact that we know that the first thing that subnet owners will attempt to do is try to limit the inflation that goes to people that are selling, for instance, and like this will be kind of a pressure valve for that sort of maybe malicious or non-productive approach to running a subnet. So it's just, if you don't think of things in alignment, like you can turn down the emission and let it build up slowly. But that being said, you're not turning off the emission that's going into the pool, like that's consistent, and so you can't just modulate the arbitrarily and see if you can
change
push
your price.
Yeah. So there's still you can't withhold people from participating in your mechanism. And like this was one of the main reasons why we had all of this like global TAO as well, is because we needed to make it so that you can't create kind of like a cancerous subnet in bittensor that's not getting some seeding from the actual ecosystem of TAO in the first place. So one thing that will happen is that we'll all come to own sections of all of the subnets in bittensor, which I think would be very cool, right? You'll see that people are like, I really want this subnet to succeed because I've held my ownership over time.
Yeah. By the way, am I a robot right now?
Yeah, a bit.
Okay. Let me see if I can fix that. But thank you. I appreciate it.
I think another thing that will be interesting is that instead of buying like the token for your pool, you can maybe just buy liquidity. Maybe not even buy liquidity, but owners can put in how much tally they want to put in there. So, and these get converted one-to-one, not converted, but you also get one-to-one with detail. So the more you put in, the more liquidity you have, and maybe the less volatility you have on day one of detail.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yes, I mean the question is obviously the initial distribution. What alpha token do you get in return? And yeah, Fish, did you have something to say?
No, I think I've been unmuted. I just shared our commit for our speed up in the dendrite though. Basically,
That's
just
off. That's off topic.
Not related though.
Yeah. So great, Dave. Nick, Sammy.
Yeah, just to clear something up. I think you said it already, but I just wanted to clarify to make sure. So there's no like passive TAO that's coming from the root stakers that are actually going into the dynamic TAO tokens, right?
What do you mean going into?
Like when you stake to root, the TAO that's going into root is not that you're staking is not like allocated to the liquidity pools for DTAO.
No.
Okay, that's super helpful. So I think then what you were saying before, Const, about like concern about like people choosing, like not choosing or like negatively selecting subnets isn't as big of a deal then, because you have like, I mean, like, you don't really need anybody to like short effectively the subnets, because the only people who are going to be in them are people who are going to have wanted to hold the token in some regard. So you kind of have like that information already coming in from that side.
That's not quite right, because note the people that are staked to root will be getting dividends in all the subnets in the subnet token. So they will come to actually be allocated into these subnets and hold outstanding alpha, beta, delta, epsilon, and gamma, right? So even though they started off with this passive, now they actually hold a basket of goods that is volatile after time, but their principal never changed, right? So that's is that in alignment with the way you understood it?
Gotcha. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I'll have to think about that one, but I just wanted to say, like, I think I misunderstood a fair bit of it, and I think a lot of people did. But understanding like this kind of square root function for the total proportion of tau stake to root versus d tau, determining the APY there, and then the global economic stake component really set my mind at ease on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a great takeaway. I'm gonna go and do some analysis, and then next time we'll get on novelty search, we'll have better numbers for exactly that ratio and how it works out. But it feels like the call's over, and that's great. So let's end it here. Yo, Caro, Josh, amazing work, super fascinating, super excited for what you guys have been building, and looking forward to trying it out on Cursor myself. Thanks for coming up on stage. Everyone else as well, Sammy, Dave, Fish, Nick, Pigeon. Thanks for coming, everyone, and have a good night.
Yeah, great combo, guys.
Should we do the OTF on 3?
I mean,
Or
no one
bittensor on
here.
3?
Yeah, I think that's better. No?
Okay. All right. Bittensor on 3. 1, 2, 3. Bittensor! Let's go.
Do it.
W's.
All right,
Hey,
guys, let's go. Good day. Yeah, booyah, booyah, booyah.
Yeah.
Oh, rip. Okay. I guess that ended. I went to go make lunch. I think I want to do another round of prep for West Coast ML, which hopefully I get to stream this evening, which should be approximately 3 hours from now. I don't know if I'm going to stream the prep session because I feel like I want to concentrate, but I'm